I never imagined my life would unravel inside a quiet suburban home in Oregon, the kind of place where neighbors waved, lawns stayed neatly trimmed, and kids biked down tree-lined streets without fear. To the outside world, my husband Carter appeared attentive, hardworking, and deeply devoted to our 8-year-old daughter Lily. But inside our walls, the truth had been shifting for years, and the cracks were widening faster than I could hide them. It started with his temper, small eruptions disguised as stress or exhaustion. Then came the controlling comments, what Lily should wear, how she should talk, which activities she was allowed to enjoy. At first, I thought he was just being protective, maybe old-fashioned, maybe insecure. But something darker grew beneath the surface, something I didn't want to acknowledge until it was too late. The night he shoved Lily hard enough for her to stumble into the coffee table shattered every excuse I had left. I remember Lily's face, the shock in her eyes, the confusion, the fear she was too young to comprehend. Carter had been yelling about her school project, furious she accidentally spilled glue on the dining table. His anger was irrational, a wildfire that consumed logic. When he pushed her, the sound of her hitting the table snapped something inside me. I pulled her into my arms, shielding her while he stormed out of the room, muttering about respect and discipline. My hands trembled as I comforted her, my heart pounding so loudly I could barely hear her small sobs. That moment became the turning point, the instant when fear transformed into resolve. I knew I had to protect Lily, even if it meant dismantling the life I had built with the man I once trusted. I knew he would never change. And I knew leaving was the only path left. Leaving wasn't simple, not with Carter's mother lurking in the background like a shadow. Diane had always been intrusive, but after Lily was born, her influence intensified. She criticized my parenting, offered unsolicited advice, and often dismissed my concerns about Carter's temper. When I finally confided in her about the shove, hoping for support, she stared at me coldly and said, "Maybe Lily needs firmer guidance." That sentence replayed in my mind for days. Instead of helping, she amplified Carter's manipulation, painting him as the victim and me as the dramatic, unstable wife. Whenever Carter escalated, Diane encouraged him to stand his ground, reinforcing the belief that Lily's fear was misbehavior rather than a response to abuse. It became clear that I could expect no ally in her. If anything, she would help him tighten the cage. I began documenting everything, photos of bruises, recordings of outbursts, time-stamped journal entries with exact details. I stored the evidence in a hidden folder on a cloud drive he didn't know existed. Every time I captured something, my hands shook, but I forced myself to continue. This wasn't just preparation, it was survival. Lily grew quieter, flinching at sudden noises, avoiding eye contact with her father, retreating into her room whenever he was home. I enrolled her in school counseling, under the excuse of anxiety, though the staff seemed to sense more. One counselor gently asked, "Is everything okay at home?" I lied, but her eyes told me she didn't believe me. That silent understanding gave me the strength to plan more openly. I met with a family lawyer, researched shelters, and mapped out exit strategies. Lily deserved safety. She deserved peace, and I would do anything to give it to her. The day we left was cloudy, heavy with coastal humidity. Carter was at work, and Diane was out of town visiting a friend. I packed only essentials, documents, clothing, Lily's favorite stuffed rabbit, a small box of keepsakes. My heart raced as I loaded the car, checking over my shoulder repeatedly, terrified Carter would come home early. Lily sensed my urgency, but didn't ask questions. Maybe she already knew this was our escape. The moment I closed the trunk, a weight lifted off my chest. I strapped her into the back seat, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "We're going somewhere safe." She nodded without hesitation. As I pulled away from the driveway, I glanced once in the rearview mirror at the house that had become our prison. I didn't feel grief, only relief. We drove toward Portland, toward shelter resources the lawyer had recommended. With each mile, the air felt clearer, freer, like the beginning of something new. The shelter felt nothing like I expected. I imagined a cold, crowded building filled with tension and whispered fear. But instead, it was warm, softly lit, with quiet hallways and counselors who spoke gently. Lily clung to my hand as we checked in, her eyes scanning the room cautiously. The intake worker, a woman named Marlene, offered her a stuffed bear and asked if she wanted some hot chocolate while we finished the paperwork. For the first time in weeks, I saw a flicker of brightness cross Lily's face. When Marlene led her to a small children's nook, she turned back to look at me, not with fear, but with a question. Is it really over? I wished I could promise her that, but we were only at the beginning. The room assigned to us was small but clean, with 2 beds and a lock on the inside. As I stood in that room, the realization washed over me. No matter what happened next, tonight we would sleep without fear of footsteps stalking the hallway. I didn't cry until Lily fell asleep. The quiet overwhelmed me. It was the first silence in years that didn't feel threatening. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the folder of documents I had brought, the evidence of our past, the proof of our pain. I uploaded additional photos, voice memos, and journal entries to the lawyer's secure link. My phone buzzed repeatedly, but I ignored every call. When Carter's name finally appeared, a cold shiver ran through me. I powered the phone off and placed it face down on the dresser. Marlene had explained that the shelter could help us file a restraining order first thing in the morning. For the first time, I felt a spark of hope, not just for escape, but for justice. I tucked Lily's blanket around her shoulders and whispered into the dark, "We're going to be okay." This time, I almost believed it. The next morning came earlier than I expected. Lily stirred beside me, stretching slowly, blinking against the sunlight filtering through the blinds. She looked peaceful, almost unrecognizable from the timid, tense little girl she had been just a day before. We ate breakfast with other families, each carrying their own stories of survival. No one asked questions, no one judged. There was a quiet solidarity between us, a shared understanding that didn't need words. After breakfast, a legal advocate named Teresa met with me to discuss the restraining order. She explained the process, the risks, and the steps we would need to take. As she spoke, I felt something inside me firm into steel. I wasn't just escaping anymore, I was fighting back. The advocate helped me file the paperwork, attaching all the evidence I had collected. When I left the courthouse, the wind felt colder but cleaner, like the world had shifted and aligned itself with our truth. Carter's reaction came swiftly. My phone lit up with messages, first pleading, then angry, then threatening. I kept the device off, but Teresa advised me to save every message for legal documentation. "He's losing control," she said calmly. "This behavior will only strengthen your case." Still, the thought of him out there, furious and unpredictable, sent waves of anxiety through my chest. That night, Lily crawled into my bed, whispering that she had nightmares about him yelling. I held her, feeling both heartbreak and determination simmer inside me. She deserved a childhood untouched by fear. I stroked her hair until her breathing softened. The restraining order hearing was scheduled for the following week. Until then, the shelter became our sanctuary. We attended counseling sessions, took part in art therapy, and slowly relearned what safety felt like. Every day brought a small victory, Lily laughing, me sleeping through the night, both of us breathing easier. The days leading up to the hearing felt strangely suspended in time. Every morning, Lily and I followed a new routine: breakfast in the common room, a short walk around the block with a counselor for safety, and then sessions where we worked through the emotional debris of the past years. Lily painted pictures of sunny parks and tall trees, scenes noticeably free of fear or shadows. I wrote letters I knew I'd never send, letters filled with the anger and grief I had buried for so long. One afternoon, Teresa gathered me to review our case file, now thick with printed messages, photos, and testimony. "You did everything right," she reassured me. Her confidence gave me strength, but my hands still trembled when I thought of facing Carter in court. That night, as I lay awake, listening to the hum of the shelter's ventilation, I reminded myself of the truth. I was not the same woman he had controlled, and tomorrow's fear would never again outweigh my daughter's safety. When the hearing finally arrived, the courthouse felt colder than I remembered. Teresa walked beside me while another advocate watched over Lily in a playroom downstairs. I clutched my folders so tightly that my knuckles ached. Carter stood across the room, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with the arrogance he'd always worn like armor. For a moment, that familiar dread flickered inside me, but then I remembered the nights locked in the bedroom, Lily's trembling hands, the bruises he'd inflicted not just on our bodies, but on our spirits. The judge listened patiently as Teresa presented our evidence. Carter tried to speak over her, his voice rising in frantic denial, but the judge silenced him with a sharp reprimand. When the ruling was finally announced, a full protective order, I felt the air punch out of my lungs. The world didn't collapse. Instead, it opened. Back at the shelter, Lily ran into my arms the moment she saw me. I lifted her and spun her gently, feeling the weight of months begin to melt away. The staff cheered softly, the kind of celebration reserved for victories that are hard won and deeply personal. For the first time, I allowed myself to think about the future without a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. We spent the next few days exploring permanent housing options. A caseworker helped me apply for emergency assistance and begin the process of securing a small apartment. It wasn't going to be much, just a one-bedroom near Lily's future school, but it would be ours. A place without shouting, without threats, without fear. I caught Lily drawing a picture of the new apartment, complete with flowers in the window and two stick figures holding hands. I pinned it on our shelter bulletin board as a reminder. Hope wasn't just a dream anymore. It was taking shape. Moving day arrived faster than expected. The apartment was small, with creaky floors and old cabinets, but it smelled like fresh paint and captive. The side blows fell far upon my coat. Volunteers from the shelter helped carry in donated furniture, a twin bed for Lily, a mattress for me, a small couch, and a kitchen table with mismatching chairs. When everyone left, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Lily bounced on her bed, her laughter echoing in the empty room. I sat on the couch, overwhelmed by the simplicity of this moment. No footsteps to fear, no angry voice calling my name. No angry voice calling my name. Just us, in a space we could finally breathe in. That night, we ate pizza on the floor, using paper plates because the dish set hadn't arrived yet. Lily fell asleep against my arm before she finished her slice. I carried her to her bed and whispered a promise into the dim light. This is only the beginning. The weeks that followed were a careful process of rebuilding. Lily started therapy through a community program, and each session seemed to unlock a little more of the child she was meant to be. She laughed louder, asked more questions, and stopped flinching at sudden sounds. I found part-time work at a local clinic, nothing like the nursing job I once dreamed of returning to, but enough to keep us going while I rebuilt our foundation. The routine gave our days shape and safety. Every night, Lily and I read together before bed, choosing stories filled with brave characters and new adventures. Sometimes she asked about her father, why he yelled, why he hurt us, whether she did something wrong. Each time I answered with care, reminding her that none of it was her fault. Healing wasn't linear, but each quiet evening felt like proof that we were moving in the right direction. One afternoon, months after our escape, I came home to find Lily sitting at the kitchen table with her crayons scattered everywhere. She looked up with a proud smile and handed me a drawing. It was a picture of our new apartment, but this time, there were no bars on the windows, no dark corners, no looming shapes in the background. Just bright colors, flowers, and two figures holding hands beneath a sun shaped like a heart. "This is us," she said softly. I hugged her tightly, feeling something inside me settle, a quiet confirmation that we had crossed into a new chapter. We were no longer defined by what we survived, we were defined by what we chose next. And what we chose was peace, safety, and a life where Lily could grow without fear. A life where I could finally breathe deeply again. The next phase of our new life began quietly, almost unremarkably, but with a kind of strength I didn't recognize in myself before. Emma and I moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment managed by the local women's support center. The walls were plain, the furniture donated, and the view from the window overlooked a parking lot. But to us, it felt like freedom with a front door. Emma walked through the rooms slowly on our first day, touching the counters, opening the closet doors, testing the light switches, as if confirming that everything was truly ours. When she peeked into her bedroom, she froze for a moment before whispering, "No yelling here." I knelt beside her and shook my head. "No yelling, ever again." She nodded carefully, as if making sure she believed me. Then she stepped inside and claimed the room as hers, with a quiet, determined smile. I spent the afternoon filling out job applications, updating forms, and meeting with a counselor assigned to us through the support center. She helped me create a safety plan, map out the legal process, and schedule Emma's first child therapy appointment. Every task felt heavy, like dragging my past behind me, but doing it for Emma made each step meaningful instead of painful. That evening, we sat on the floor eating takeout noodles from cheap plastic bowls. There were no slammed doors, no footsteps to fear, no sudden commands. Just steam rising from dinner and Emma leaning against my arm. I watched her relax into the quiet, the muscles in her shoulders softening in a way I hadn't seen in years. As the sun dipped below the rooftops outside, I realized this moment, this simple, ordinary peace, was the beginning of everything we had fought for. The world had not magically transformed, but our world had. And I promised myself that no one would ever take this from us again. The next morning arrived with an eerie quiet, the kind that felt like the world was holding its breath. I woke up to the sound of my daughter breathing softly beside me, her small hands curled near her face. For a moment, I just sat there watching her, letting the weight of everything settle around me. We were safe, but safety didn't erase what we'd endured. It didn't undo the memories. It didn't silence the echo of slammed doors, raised voices, or the terror that used to flash in her eyes whenever footsteps approached. But it did give us something we never had before, a beginning. I brewed a pot of coffee, the smell filling the apartment, grounding me in the present. I opened my laptop and stared at the folder where I had stored every piece of evidence. Photos, recordings, messages, medical visits, everything that proved what my daughter and I had survived. Today, I would hand it all over to my attorney. Today, something would finally shift. At the attorney's office, the air felt heavier than usual, but my resolve didn't waver. I handed over the USB drive and watched her slide it into her computer. She put on her glasses, leaned in, and her expression changed quickly, from neutral professionalism to something closer to horror. She paused the video I had recorded months ago, the one where my daughter shrank under her father's shouting. The attorney looked at me with a softness I wasn't used to. She said this wasn't just a case, this was a rescue. Her words lodged themselves somewhere deep inside me, a place that had been numb for years. She assured me we would move forward quickly and that I had done everything right. Walking out of her office, I felt something strange building inside my chest. Courage, maybe, or the first spark of a life that didn't revolve around fear. Later that afternoon, I met with a counselor specializing in trauma, someone recommended by the shelter we were staying connected with. She had kind eyes and a calm voice, the kind that made it feel safe to breathe. She explained how trauma rewires the brain, how survival becomes instinct, how healing takes time. She said my daughter would need stability, routine, gentleness, all things I was finally able to provide. We scheduled weekly sessions for both of us. When I told my daughter about the counselor, she nodded with more understanding than any child her age should have. She asked if the counselor would help her stop being scared at night. I told her yes, and for the first time, I really believed it. That night, after dinner, I received an unexpected call from my mother-in-law. I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. Her voice came through like a mix of syrup and venom, sweet on the surface, sharp underneath. She said she heard rumors, said people were talking, said I was making her son look bad. I almost laughed at the absurdity. She accused me of exaggerating, of poisoning my daughter's mind, of tearing the family apart. But something had changed in me. I didn't tremble anymore. I didn't shrink. I let her finish her rant. And then I told her calmly that her son's actions were his own. I told her that protecting my child mattered more than the family image she worshipped. Before she could spit back another insult, I hung up. My hands didn't shake. Instead, I felt something solid settle inside me. A boundary, firm and unmovable. The following week unfolded with a rhythm we had never known before. Mornings were gentle, slow, and quiet. No screaming, no rushing, no tension that made my daughter flinch at every sound. She started drawing again, filling pages with bright colors and little characters with smiling faces. Her therapist said this was a good sign, a small doorway back into childhood. I clung to those drawings like lifelines. Meanwhile, my attorney moved fast. She filed for a restraining order and temporary sole custody, and the court granted both within days. When she called to tell me, I had to sit down. Relief washed over me in a way that almost hurt, like my body didn't know what to do with something good. For the first time, I could breathe without bracing for consequence. It felt unreal, but real enough to let hope in. Of course, hope didn't erase everything. My husband, now officially my estranged husband, reacted exactly as I expected. He sent angry messages that my attorney told me not to respond to. He called from different numbers, leaving voicemails filled with accusations, denial, and twisted versions of events. Every time my phone vibrated, my heart jumped, but I reminded myself, he couldn't touch us anymore. Not legally, not physically, not emotionally. My attorney forwarded everything to the court, building the case brick by brick. The more he talked, the more he revealed the words that made it and feel him to ascend by his head. The first supervised visitation hearing came faster than I expected. I was terrified, not that he would regain access, but that my daughter might be forced into a situation she wasn't ready for. But when the judge reviewed the evidence, her tone shifted. She said the harm was clear. She said forcing contact now could re-traumatize a child already struggling to sleep at night. She denied visitation for the time being, ordering a psychological evaluation instead. I sat there frozen. Then, quietly, tears slipped down my face. Not sad tears, but tears of justice finally catching up. My daughter wasn't just being heard, she was being protected. The next milestone came unexpectedly. One evening, while we were baking cookies in our tiny apartment kitchen, my daughter stopped stirring the bowl and looked up at me. She asked if we were done being scared now. The question cut straight through me. I knelt down beside her, wiping flour from her cheek, and told her we were building a life where fear didn't get to be in charge anymore. She nodded, as if trying the idea on, and then she smiled. I found the idea that the problem was being based on the fact. Once went on the bench, the other side, and the two were all louder, and I was the last. Oh yeah, we can be here. In that moment, surrounded by butter, sugar, and a tiny kitchen that smelled like vanilla, I felt something shift. Healing wasn't distant anymore. It was right here, inching its way into our lives piece by piece. As winter approached, our routines became steadier, almost peaceful. My daughter started sleeping through the night again, though she still needed the hallway light on. I didn't mind. Every small sign of progress felt like a victory carved from stone. I found a part-time job at a local clinic, the kind of place where people remembered your name and asked how your morning was. My co-workers didn't know our story, but they treated me with kindness anyway. That alone felt like a luxury I hadn't known in years. After work, I picked up my daughter from her after-school program, where she had made a friend, a girl who loved crafts and always shared her glitter pens. Watching them run toward me, laughing, reminded me of a truth I had forgotten. Children grow when they feel safe. Meanwhile, the legal case kept unfolding. My attorney began preparing for the custody trial, stacking every piece of evidence we had into a timeline so airtight it felt like armor. She told me not to worry, but worry had been a habit for so long that letting go felt like learning a new language. Still, there was something different now. Fear didn't swallow me whole anymore. Fear stood outside the window, looking in, unwelcome but powerless. My husband, by past, was running out of places to hide. Every report, every voice recording, every photo chipped away at the image he tried to project. And with each step forward, I felt myself standing taller, as if reclaiming inches he'd stolen from me over the years. One afternoon, my mother-in-law attempted to call me again, but this time I didn't pick up. Her messages had gone from manipulative guilt trips to desperate pleas, begging me to reconsider how much I was destroying the family. I used to crumble under those words. I used to shrink. But now, I simply blocked the number and continued making dinner. My daughter sat at the table coloring a picture of a house with a big sun overhead. A simple drawing, but the meaning wasn't lost on me. We were building that house, maybe not with wood or bricks, but with choices, boundaries, and courage that grew sharper every day. And this time, no one would be allowed to tear it down. Healing came in quiet, surprising ways, like the morning my daughter tugged my sleeve and asked if we could adopt a cat, because cats know how to be brave, even when they're small. Or the night I realized I no longer jumped when someone knocked on the door. I could finally breathe deeper, speak louder, think clearer. The fear that once clung to every corner of my thoughts had begun to fade, replaced by something sturdier, self-respect maybe, or the beginnings of true peace. I knew there were still challenges ahead, trials, paperwork, the final unraveling of a marriage built on control. But for the first time, I wasn't facing those things alone. I had myself, I had my daughter, I had a life waiting to be lived on our terms. The custody trial arrived like a storm I had anticipated for months. Courtrooms always felt sterile, cold, and intimidating, but this one seemed different, charged with tension that wasn't entirely mine. My daughter was placed in a supervised waiting area, coloring books at the ready, while I sat across from Carter and his attorney. He looked older, thinner around the eyes, a little desperate perhaps, but still trying to mask it with false composure. I clutched the folder with every document, photo and recording, feeling its weight like armor against my nerves. When my attorney began presenting the evidence, the room grew quiet. Each image, each recording, each date and statement laid bare the truth. The judge listened attentively, flipping through pages, her expression unreadable. And then, after what felt like hours compressed into minutes, she spoke. Temporary full custody would be granted to me, with supervised visitation for Carter only under strict conditions. Relief crashed over me in waves. It wasn't just a legal victory, it was a declaration of our right to exist safely, without fear. Walking out of the courthouse, the air outside seemed brighter, sharper. My daughter ran toward me with a grin that made my chest ache in the best way. I scooped her up, holding her tightly, as if to anchor this moment into reality. She whispered, "We're free now, right?" And I nodded, brushing her hair from her forehead. "Yes, baby, we're free." For the first time, freedom felt tangible, not abstract. We returned to our apartment and celebrated quietly. Pasta and juice boxes, laughter filling the corners that had once felt so small and oppressive. That evening, I tucked her into bed, lingering to watch her chest rise and fall in steady, peaceful rhythm. It was the simplest thing, yet profoundly significant. We had crossed a threshold into safety, into life, and into healing. The weeks that followed were filled with both routine and discovery. My daughter thrived in school and therapy, her laughter becoming a soundtrack I had longed to hear. I discovered parts of myself I had buried: joy, patience, even the courage to hope for the future. We decorated the apartment with her drawings and small plants, turning a sparse space into a home brimming with love. I enrolled in a part-time online course, determined to rebuild my career and regain the independence I had once sacrificed. Each day felt like a layer of armor peeling away, revealing resilience beneath. Carter attempted sporadic contact, but the court's orders protected us. Every time he tried to reassert control, the legal shield stood firm. Slowly, we were living life on our terms, not under someone else's shadow. Months later, a visit from a local support group marked another milestone. Women who had walked similar paths gathered in a sunlit community room, sharing their stories, their tears, and their victories. I listened, and when my turn came, I spoke softly about the fear, the escape, and the slow process of reclaiming life for my daughter and me. Heads nodded, tears glimmered in eyes that had witnessed pain too familiar. Afterwards, one woman approached me, holding my hands and saying, "You did it, you saved her." The words echoed long after she left. They weren't about me. They were about our survival, our courage, and our insistence that we deserved better. The fear of the past could not touch us anymore. We had claimed our space in the world. The apartment had become a sanctuary of small victories. Each morning sunlight streamed through the blinds, casting warm lines across the kitchen floor where my daughter and I ate breakfast together. No shouting, no slamming doors, no cold fear, just pancakes, syrup, and laughter that sounded foreign and beautiful after months of tension. We painted a wall in her bedroom bright yellow, symbolizing happiness and light, and she insisted we add a sun wearing sunglasses. It was silly, but it was hers, and it was ours. Every time I glanced at that wall, I felt a quiet pride, proof that life could be created from pieces of brokenness if you dared to try. School became a refuge for her. Teachers noticed the change almost immediately. Her concentration improved, her social interactions blossomed, and her smile became unguarded. At parent-teacher conferences, they praised her curiosity and kindness, unaware of the storm she had endured before arriving in their classroom. When she came home with stories about friends and projects, I felt a joy that had been buried for years. She was reclaiming her childhood, and in watching her grow, I began to rediscover the parts of myself that had been lost. There were still nightmares, and some days were harder than others, but each day brought a step further from the fear that had once defined us. The court process concluded after a tense but necessary series of hearings. Permanent custody was officially granted to me, and supervised visitation was established with strict monitoring. Carter's attempts to manipulate the system backfired. Every message, every confrontation had strengthened the court's view of his behavior. I held the documents in my hands, feeling the tangible weight of our safety, the evidence that justice could exist and that abuse could be confronted. My daughter hugged me tightly, whispering, "Now we can be happy." For the first time, I allowed myself to believe it. Not just imagine it, not just hope. It was real. Months passed, and the world felt like a brighter place. We settled into routines filled with school projects, bedtime stories, weekend walks, and occasional sleepovers with trusted friends. Therapy continued, not as a crutch, but as a compass, guiding us through the lingering shadows. I found work that fulfilled me, creating a stable life we could call our own. The apartment, the routines, the laughter, the sun-painted walls, they were tangible proof that we had survived and reclaimed our lives. And though the past would never fully disappear, its power over us had ended. Together, we had created a future built on safety, love, and resilience. A life no longer defined by fear, but by hope, courage, and the quiet strength of a mother and her daughter standing side by side.